The Kansas sky on that late August morning looked like someone had stretched a sheet of hammered copper across the horizon. The sun climbed fast and mean, the way it always did during harvest season, burning off the last of the night's coolness before 6 in the morning. Dale Merritt stood at the edge of his porch, a ceramic mug of black coffee steaming in his right hand. His left thumb hooked into the front pocket of his worn Wranglers. He didn't look at the sunrise the way some men do, with wonder or gratitude. He looked at it the way a general surveys a battlefield, calculating, measuring, already planning the next move. The Merritt farm stretched across 412 acres of south-central Kansas flatland, just off Route 9 between the small towns of Pratt and Medicine Lodge. The wheat fields rolled out in every direction like a golden ocean frozen midwave, heavy with grain that had survived a dry spring and 2 weeks of merciless August heat. It was a good crop, maybe the best in 6 years. Dale had watched it grow with the kind of quiet devotion he rarely showed anything else in his life, checking moisture levels, adjusting irrigation schedules, walking the rows at dusk with his hands brushing the tops of the stalks like a man checking the temperature of something precious. Harvest week had started Monday. It was now Thursday. They were behind. "You eating before you head out?" The voice came from inside the screen door. Caleb. His son's voice still caught Dale off guard sometimes. It had dropped low and steady in the past 2 years. Less like a boy and more like a man trying on a coat that almost fit. "Already ate," Dale said without turning around. "You had coffee." "That's not eating. It's enough." A pause. The screen door creaked but didn't open. "Rodrigo's crew is already out there. I saw their trucks on the south road when I woke up." "Good. Tell Martinez to start the number 2 combine on the east quarter. I'll take the John Deere along the ridge line." "Dad," Caleb, that single word spoken in Dale's particular tone, flat, final, carrying the weight of a closed door, ended the conversation the way it had ended hundreds of conversations before it. Not angry, not cruel, simply done. Dale drained the last of his coffee, set the mug on the porch railing, and walked down the 3 wooden steps toward the equipment barn without looking back. Dale Merritt was 54 years old and looked like the land itself had made him. 6 feet and 2 inches of broad-shouldered, sun-darkened, work-hardened American farmer. His hands were the first thing people noticed, wide as shovels, knuckles thick, palms crossed with old scars from barbed wire and machinery. His face was deeply lined, not from age so much as weather and expression, or rather the sustained effort of keeping expression out of it. His hair had gone mostly silver, cut short and practical. His eyes were a pale, washed-out gray-blue, the color of sky reflected in shallow water, and they moved slowly and deliberately, the way his whole body moved, with the economy of a man who had learned that wasted motion was wasted time. People in Pratt County had called him the brute from Route 9 for as long as anyone could clearly remember, not because he was violent. Dale Merritt had never raised his hand to another person in his adult life as far as anyone knew. They called him that because of the relentlessness. The man did not stop. During planting season, he was in the fields before sunrise and came in after dark. During harvest, he sometimes didn't come in at all, sleeping 2 or 3 hours in the cab of a combine before starting again. He had fired 3 hired hands over the years, not for incompetence but for taking lunch breaks that ran too long. He had driven himself to the Pratt County Medical Center with a broken collarbone, broken when a hydraulic arm on his tractor failed and swung back into him, set it, and returned to finish the day's work. The nurse who treated him, a woman named Gloria Perkins who had known Dale since high school, had told the story at her church group for years, as proof that some men were simply built differently. What Gloria Perkins didn't mention, because she was a kind woman, was what most people in the county privately believed, that Dale Merritt worked the way he did because if he ever stopped, the silence would swallow him whole. Susan Merritt had died 7 years ago. Ovarian cancer, stage 3 at diagnosis, stage 4 9 months later. She had been 48 years old. She had been the only person on earth who could make Dale laugh. Not a polite chuckle, but a real laugh, sudden and surprised like he hadn't meant to let it out. She had been the only person who called him by his middle name, which was Thomas, and made it sound like something soft. She had been the one who remembered birthdays and kept the books and planted marigolds along the fence line every spring and made sure. Caleb did his homework and knew that his father loved him even when Dale couldn't find the words to say it directly. When she died, Dale had stood at her grave on a cold November morning with Caleb beside him, 12 years old and shaking, and Dale had placed one hand briefly on top of his son's head, the closest he could come to the embrace the boy needed. and then he had turned and walked back to the truck. 2 days later, he was back in the fields, turning the winter cover crop under. Because the farm didn't stop for grief, and neither, he had decided, would he. Caleb was 19 now. He worked the farm because there was no real alternative. College had been discussed once, briefly, during a supper that ended in the kind of silence that meant it would never be discussed again. He was quieter than boys his age should be, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn jaw. And he moved through the farm with the careful precision of someone who had learned exactly how much space he was allowed to take up. The distance between them was not a thing either of them had chosen. It had grown the way weeds grow in untended ground, slowly, then all at once. Until one day you looked up and the gap was wide enough that crossing it felt like a project that required more energy than either of them had left at the end of a 14-hour day. By 7:30 Thursday morning, the Merritt farm was running at full force. Dale had 3 hired crews working the harvest. The largest was Rodrigo Solano's crew, 8 men, all of them experienced, most of them from the same region of Michoacán, Mexico, who had been coming to the Merritt farm during wheat harvest for the past 5 years. Rodrigo was 38, compact and efficient, with a weathered face that looked older and quick dark eyes that looked younger. His English was functional and direct. He and Dale had developed the kind of working relationship built entirely on mutual respect for competence. They didn't socialize, didn't exchange pleasantries, but each trusted the other absolutely when it came to the work. Rodrigo's daughter Emma had come with him this year. That was new. Dale had noticed her Tuesday when she arrived. A small girl, maybe 6 or 7, with 2 long dark braids and enormous brown eyes that took in the farm with a mixture of awe and caution. She sat in the cab of Rodrigo's old F250 during the working hours, coloring in a notebook or sleeping, and came out in the evenings when the crew gathered near the bunkhouse. Dale had registered her presence the way he registered most peripheral things, noted, filed, irrelevant to operations. He hadn't asked about her. It wasn't his business. Rodrigo, for his part, had apologized on Tuesday morning when he introduced her, a brief, slightly stiff explanation that his wife, Elena, had been admitted to the hospital in Wichita the previous week for a kidney issue, and there had been no one to stay with Emma. And he was sorry for the imposition. She would stay out of the way. Dale had looked at the girl for exactly 2 seconds. Then he'd looked at Rodrigo and said, "Keep her away from the machinery," and walked away. Which, from Dale Merritt, was essentially a warm welcome. Thursday's harvest moved well through the morning. The air was hot and dry, perfect combining weather, and the wheat was crisp and clean with good test weights. Dale worked the ridgeline on the north quarter. The big green John Deere 9700 cutting a 25-foot swath with each pass, the grain tank filling steadily. He could hear the other combines working the lower fields, the sound carrying across the flat land. A mechanical chorus that in Dale's private mind was the closest thing to music he still responded to. He stopped once at 10 to check moisture readings on the grain coming into the tank. 2%, perfect for storage. He allowed himself a single brief nod of satisfaction, then climbed back into the cab. At 11:15, his radio crackled. It was Caleb, running the chase cart on the south field. "Dad, Martinez is asking if you want to move the second combine to the west boundary after lunch. Tell him yes. Wind's been from the southwest, crops drier on that side. Copy." A pause. Then, "Dad, have you seen Rodrigo this morning?" Dale frowned at the horizon. "He's on the east quarter with his crew. I drove past the east quarter 20 minutes ago. His crew's there, but Rodrigo wasn't with them. One of the guys said he went to call the hospital about Elena. That was 2 hours ago." Dale felt the first small pull of something, not quite concern, more like the automatic alertness of a man who tracks the components of his operation. His daughter in the truck? "That's the thing," Caleb said. And there was something in his voice Dale hadn't heard before. Careful quality, like he was about to say something he wasn't sure how to say. "I checked the truck. It's empty." Dale set the combine to idle and stood up in the cab. He looked out over the fields. The east quarter was a half-mile away, the wheat there already cut in wide swaths, the stubble golden in the morning light. To the south, the uncut portion of the north field stretched out, a dense wall of standing wheat. Chest high, the kind of terrain where a small child could disappear completely and not be visible from 10 feet away. He thought about the girl, the small, serious face, the braids. He calculated. Rodrigo had gone to make a phone call 2 hours ago. The truck was empty. The crew hadn't raised an alarm, which either meant they didn't know or thought she was somewhere specific. The bunkhouse was a quarter-mile from the fields. The open ground between the equipment barn and the standing wheat was a long stretch of nothing, easy for a child to cross without being seen. Dale climbed down from the cab. He walked to the edge of the standing wheat on the north quarter and stood there for a moment. The wheat was dense and tall, the rows closed, the interior shadowed and complex. At his height, it came to his chest. For a 7-year-old, it would be over the head. A complete, disorienting world of identical golden walls in every direction. He took one step into the wheat, then another. The combine behind him idled on. He found her 17 minutes later. She was sitting on the ground in a small natural depression in the field, a low spot where the wheat grew thinner. A circle, maybe 4 feet across, where the soil had been washed into a slight hollow by years of rain. She was sitting with her knees pulled to her chest, her 2 braids coming loose on one side. Her face wet with tears that had apparently run out because she wasn't crying now, just staring at the ground in front of her with the blank, exhausted look of a child who had been frightened for so long that the fear had turned into a kind of numbness. Her left ankle was swollen, visibly, even under the dust on her skin. She had twisted it somewhere in the field, Dale guessed, and hadn't been able to walk out. She looked up when she heard him coming. Her eyes went wide. For a moment he saw her calculate something, flee or freeze. And then she saw the size of him and froze, pulling herself tighter, her chin dropping toward her knees. Dale stopped 6 feet away from her. He was a big man, he knew. He knew how he looked coming through a wall of wheat, all width and shadow and the kind of physical presence that children sometimes found frightening before they found it reassuring. He stayed very still. He crouched down slowly, bringing himself closer to her level, his knees protesting the angle with a dull ache he ignored. "Hey," he said. She stared at him. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "My name's Dale. This is my farm." Nothing. Her eyes moved to his hands, those large, scarred hands, resting on his knees. He remembered then what Rodrigo had told him. She was here because her mother was in the hospital. He remembered with a precision that still surprised him sometimes, what it was like to be small and scared and uncertain whether the people in your life were going to be okay. "Your dad's looking for you," Dale said, even though this was not yet strictly true. "He's worried about you." Something shifted in her face at the word dad. "Papa," she said. Her voice was very small. "Yeah." Papa. Dale held her gaze. "Can you walk?" She shook her head and looked at her ankle. Dale moved closer, slowly, giving her time to protest or pull away, and crouched beside her ankle. The swelling was concentrated around the lateral malleolus, probably a grade 1 sprain, maybe grade 2. It needed ice and rest. Nothing broken, from what he could tell. He looked at her. She was watching him with those enormous dark eyes, not with trust exactly, but with a kind of suspended judgment, waiting to see what he would do. Dale Merritt had not carried a child in his arms since Caleb was small. He had not been gentle with anything in a very long time. But he straightened up, moved to crouch beside her, and held out his arms. "I'm gonna pick you up," he said, "okay? I'll carry you out." She hesitated. Then, with the particular and heartbreaking trust of a child who has no better option, she lifted her arms toward him. He picked her up. She was so light it almost startled him. He walked out of the wheat carrying Emma Solano against his chest, her arms around his neck, her head resting just below his chin. The standing crop parted around them. The sun hit them both when they emerged into the open ground, hot and immediate. Caleb was standing at the edge of the field. He had driven the chase car down from the south field, probably following some instinct or concern, and now he stood beside it with his arms at his sides, watching his father walk out of the wheat carrying a small, sleeping-faced girl with 2 dark braids. Caleb's expression was something Dale couldn't easily read. Surprise, certainly, but something else underneath it. Something that looked, Dale thought, like the beginning of a question. Dale walked past the idling combine, past the equipment barn. He carried Emma to the shade of the big cottonwood beside the farmhouse and sat down on the grass with his back against the trunk, settling her into his lap so her injured ankle was elevated. Then he looked at Caleb. "Radio Rodrigo," Dale said. "Tell him his daughter's safe." Caleb didn't move for a second. He was still looking at his father, at the way Dale's large hands rested on the girl's small back. Careful and instinctive, the way you hold something you don't want to break. "Dad," Caleb said quietly. "Radio him, Caleb." Caleb raised the radio. His voice, when he spoke into it, was steadier than Dale might have expected, but the combine on the ridgeline was still idling, and the harvest, the critical, irreplaceable, everything-on-the-line harvest, had stopped. Rodrigo Solano arrived at the cottonwood tree at a dead run. He had been at the far edge of the farm's dirt road, standing beside his truck in the thin shade of a telephone pole, his phone pressed to his ear and his whole body tight with the particular tension of a man receiving information he is trying to stay calm about. The call from Wichita had not been good. Not catastrophic. Alina was stable, the doctor had said. But the kidney function numbers had shifted in a way that required monitoring, required possibly a procedure, required Rodrigo to hold two impossible things in his head at the same time: his wife in a hospital bed 2 hours away, and 8 men and a harvest contract depending on him to function. When his radio crackled with Caleb's voice, "Emma's safe, she's at the house," he had stood completely still for 1 second. Then he had dropped the phone into the truck's cup holder and run. He came around the equipment barn at full speed and saw them under the cottonwood tree, his daughter sitting in the lap of the largest, most stone-faced man he had ever worked for, her ankle wrapped in a cloth ice pack that Dale had clearly assembled from whatever was in the farmhouse. Her head tipped back against Dale's chest with the helpless trust of someone who had cried themselves into exhaustion. Rodrigo made a sound, involuntary, not quite a word, and dropped to his knees in the grass in front of them. Emma's eyes opened. She saw her father. And the expression on her face, the way relief and love and the release of sustained fear moved across it all at once, was the kind of thing that adults sometimes saw in children, and recognized as a purity of feeling they had long since lost access to themselves. "Papa," she said, and reached for him. Rodrigo gathered her up. He held her very tight, his face buried in her hair, and said things in Spanish that were quiet and private and not meant for anyone else. Dale pushed himself to his feet with the unhurried effort of a man his age rising from unexpected time on the ground, brushed the grass from the back of his jeans, and stood slightly apart, looking at the middle distance in the direction of the wheat fields. After a moment, Rodrigo looked up. His eyes were wet. He was a man who did not embarrass easily, but he was not embarrassed by this. "Mr. Merritt," he said. His voice was rough. "Thank you." "Ankle's probably a grade 1 sprain," Dale said, as though this were a maintenance report. "Keep it elevated. Ice every 20 minutes. She should be off it today." "Yes, of course." Rodrigo looked at him steadily. "You stopped the harvest." It was not a question. It was an acknowledgement. The combines had all gone quiet while Dale was in the field. Either Caleb had radioed the operators, or the operators had noticed and powered down out of some instinct. The farm was, for the moment, almost entirely silent. A 4-100-12-acre operation at the height of its most critical week, holding its breath. Dale said nothing. He looked at the wheat. "You stopped the harvest for my daughter," Rodrigo said again quietly. "I stopped when I saw a child was missing," Dale said. And there was something in his voice, not defensiveness, more like a man stating a law of physics. Objects fall downward. "I stopped." Rodrigo held his gaze. Then he nodded, once, with a depth that meant something larger than the gesture. Caleb had watched all of this from the edge of the equipment barn, one shoulder against the corrugated steel wall, his hat pushed back on his head. He was watching his father the way you watch something you thought you knew, and are suddenly not sure about. He had grown up with Dale Merritt's silences the way other boys grow up with their father's tempers or their fathers. Laughter. It was the weather of the household, the defining atmospheric condition of his childhood. Dale's silence was not cruel. It was simply total. It was the silence of a man who had somewhere decided that most of the things that needed saying didn't need saying aloud. After Susan Merritt died, the silence had expanded into something that felt less like quiet and more like a structure. Walls and ceiling and floor. Something you could press your hands against. Caleb had spent years pressing against it without knowing exactly what he was looking for on the other side. He had just watched his father carry a frightened child out of a wheat field and sit on the ground with her under a tree for 23 minutes, talking to her quietly in the only language he spoke to a girl who spoke almost none of it, keeping her calm, keeping her ankle elevated, keeping her safe. He didn't know what to do with that. By noon, the farm had a new operational rhythm. The combines were running again. Dale had made that decision efficiently. walking back to the John Deere and climbing into the cab with the same deliberateness with which he'd climbed out of it. But he had also, without announcing it or explaining it, moved the daily schedule around what was now an additional consideration. Emma was installed on the porch of the farmhouse with her ankle elevated on a folded feed sack, a glass of sweet tea on the railing beside her, and her coloring notebook open on her lap. Rodrigo's second-in-command, a quiet man named Victor Huerta, had set up a lawn chair 10 feet away and was doing equipment maintenance close enough to keep an eye on her without making her feel watched. Caleb came to the porch at 12:30 with 2 sandwiches and sat on the steps. He looked at Emma. She was coloring something with great focus, a horse, he could see, elaborate and detailed, the way children sometimes pour all their focused feeling into a drawing. She glanced up at him, assessed him, and went back to the horse. "I'm Caleb," he said. She looked up again. "Emma? I know. You doing okay?" She considered this seriously. "My ankle hurts." "No, that'll happen." He held out one of the sandwiches. "You hungry?" She looked at the sandwich, then at him, with the particular evaluative gravity of a 7-year-old deciding whether to accept something from a near stranger. Then she took it. They ate in companionable silence for a while. Below the porch, the farm hummed and moved. Trucks on the dirt roads. The distant sound of combines, the smell of cut wheat drifting in on the southwest wind. "Is he always like that?" Emma asked. Caleb looked at her. "Like what?" She thought about how to explain it. "Like a mountain," she finally said, "very big and very quiet." Caleb laughed, a genuine short laugh that surprised him. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, that's pretty much right." Emma nodded, as though this confirmed something she'd suspected. "Mountains are safe," she said with complete seriousness, and went back to her horse. Caleb sat with that for a moment. Then he looked out at the fields where his father's combine was moving along the ridgeline, steady and relentless as ever. Mountains are safe. He hadn't thought about his father that way in a long time. The afternoon heat was brutal. By 2 o'clock, the thermometer on the barn wall read 103 degrees, the kind of dry Kansas heat that felt like standing in front of an open oven. And the harvest crews worked in 30-minute rotations, pulling into the shade of the equipment barn for water and rest before heading back out. Dale did not rotate. He drank from a water jug in the combine cab and kept moving. At 3-40-5, something happened that had not happened in 7 years. Dale brought the combine around on the south pass of the North Quarter and saw, from the elevated cab, a small figure at the edge of the field below. Rodrigo was down there. He had spent the afternoon between the East Quarter and the porch, checking on Emma every hour, communicating with the hospital about Elena, running his crew, and he was now standing at the field's edge with Emma on his back. Her arms around his neck, her injured ankle carefully held clear of his body. He had apparently decided she needed to be outside, and this was the compromise. He would be her legs. Dale watched this for a moment from the cab. Then, without entirely knowing he was going to do it, he brought the combine to a full stop. He climbed down, walked across the stubble field to the edge where Rodrigo stood. Rodrigo turned when he heard him coming, and there was a brief shift in his expression, not alarm, more like the alertness of a man recalibrating. Dale looked at Emma on her father's back. She looked back at him with those dark eyes. "She want to see the combine?" Dale said. Rodrigo blinked. "Excuse me?" "The machine." Dale nodded toward the John Deere. "Kids usually want to see it up close. Does she want to see it?" Rodrigo looked at his daughter. Emma, who had understood enough of this exchange to get the general meaning, was already sitting up straighter on her father's back with an expression of alert interest. Rodrigo said something to her in Spanish. Her eyes went wide. "She says yes," Rodrigo said. There was something in his voice that wasn't quite the careful professional tone he normally used with Dale, something warmer and more unguarded. Dale turned and walked toward the combine. He heard Rodrigo following with Emma. At the machine, Dale reached up and lifted Emma from Rodrigo's back, one smooth motion, his large hands under her arms, and held her up so she could look into the cab, see the controls, see the grain tank, see the reel turning slowly at idle. He narrated nothing, explained nothing in technical detail. He just held her up and let her look. Emma pressed both hands against the cab window and stared inside with the complete absorption of a child, encountering something enormous and mechanical and therefore magical. "Grande," she breathed. "Yeah," Dale said. "She's big." Rodrigo was standing beside the combine's front tire, which came up to his chest, and his face in that moment was doing something complicated. something that mixed gratitude and sadness and a kind of recognition. That this stoic man was showing his daughter something, deliberately, in the middle of the most expensive afternoon of his year. Dale set Emma back on Rodrigo's back. 20 minutes, he said, meaning the break. Then he climbed back into the cab. But Rodrigo noticed, and Caleb, watching from the chase cart 50 yards away, noticed that it took Dale Merritt slightly longer than usual to start the combine moving again. That evening, after the crews had gone to the bunkhouse and the equipment was shut down and the farm settled into the particular exhausted quiet of a long harvest day, Caleb found his father at the kitchen table. This was unusual. Dale normally did the day's bookkeeping at the table, invoice tracking, moisture logs, delivery scheduling, but he usually did it quickly and without lingering. Tonight he was sitting with the ledger open and a pen in his hand, but he wasn't writing. He was looking at the table. Caleb poured himself a glass of water from the tap. He stood at the counter for a moment. The kitchen still had the blue curtains Susan had put up in 2017, the year before she got sick. Nobody had changed them. Caleb sometimes wondered if his father even saw them anymore, or if they had become part of the background noise of the house. "We lost about 3 hours today," Caleb said. Not accusing, just stating. "I know. Martinez says if the weather holds through Sunday, we can still make the contract window. I know that too." Caleb drank his water, looked at his father's back. "Why didn't you send one of the hands to look for her?" Caleb asked. The question had been sitting in him since morning. Dale was quiet for a moment. "I saw her go in," he said. "You saw her? From the cab?" "I thought she was just near the edge, but then," he stopped. "I saw her go in. I was the one who saw her." Caleb turned this over. "So you felt responsible?" Dale didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. "Dad." Caleb set down his glass. He was aware, even as he was doing it, that he was entering territory they had implicitly agreed not to enter, that he was pressing against the silence in a way that 7 years of practice had taught him not to. But something about today, the image of his father carrying that child out of the wheat, sitting on the ground under the cottonwood, holding her there with those careful, enormous hands, had shifted something in him. "Can I ask you something?" Dale looked up. His gray-blue eyes were level and unreadable. "When Mom died," Caleb said carefully, "were you with her? At the end?" The kitchen was very quiet. "Why are you asking me that?" Dale said. His voice was still flat, but something underneath it had changed. A pressure, like the change in air before weather. "Because I wasn't there," Caleb said. "You told me to go home. I was 12 and I'd been at the hospital all week, and you told me to go home and sleep. And Mrs. Patterson from next door drove me home and I slept, and when I woke up she was already gone." He stopped. "I've always wanted to know if you were with her." Dale looked at his son for a long moment. "Go to bed, Caleb," he said, the old command, the closed door. Caleb picked up his glass. Then he put it back down and looked at his father. "Not 12 anymore," he said, quietly, without anger. "Just fact." And he walked down the hall to his room. Dale sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. The ledger was open, the pen was in his hand. He didn't write anything. Through the window across the dark fields, the wheat stood silent and waiting. Friday arrived with clouds. Not storm clouds. Not yet. But a high gray overcast that had moved in from the northwest overnight and changed the quality of the light into something flat and ambiguous. Dale was on the porch at 5:30, earlier than usual, with his coffee, reading the sky the way he read everything, carefully, without projection, looking for what was actually there. The weather app on his phone said 60% chance of rain Saturday evening. The more reliable source, the way the air smelled, the behavior of the barometric pressure, the color of the northwest horizon, said more like 50%, possibly pushing to tomorrow morning. Either way, it tightened the window. The math was becoming uncomfortable. They needed one more full day of dry conditions to hit the contract threshold. One more full day and they were solvent. One shortened day and they were negotiating extensions, eating penalties, selling some inventory at spot market prices that made Dale's jaw tighten when he thought about them. He thought about Emma's ankle. He thought about what Caleb had asked him in the kitchen. He drank his coffee. Rodrigo came to find him at 7. Dale was in the equipment barn doing a pre-operation check on the number 2 combine, checking the header height settings, the concave clearance, the blade wear on the cutter bar, when he heard the barn door and turned to see Rodrigo standing in the rectangle of gray morning light. "Mr. Merritt, do you have a minute?" Dale set down the wrench. "Go ahead." Rodrigo came inside. He stood in the barn with his hat in his hands, not deferential, exactly. More the way a man holds his hat when he's about to say something that matters and wants his hands to be doing something neutral. I want to talk to you about yesterday, Rodrigo said. It's done. Yes, but I want to say something. He paused, organizing words in a second language with the care of a man who wanted to be precise. I have worked for many farmers, 10, maybe 12, over the years. In Kansas, in Nebraska, in California when I was younger. Most of them are good men, fair men. They pay what they promise, and they don't, he searched for the word, they don't mistreat people. Dale waited. But yesterday you stopped your harvest, Rodrigo said. For Emma. You didn't know her. She is nothing to your operation. And you stopped. He held Dale's gaze. I know what that costs you. I know what this week is worth. I'm not a fool. Dale said nothing. I want to ask you something, Rodrigo said. And you don't have to answer. I know you are a private man. Ask why. The barn was quiet. Outside, the overcast sky pressed down on the land. Dale picked up the wrench again, turned it over in his hands. I had a son, he started, and then stopped. He looked at the wrench. I have a son, Caleb. A pause. When Caleb was small, 6, 7 years old, he used to follow me in the fields. I didn't encourage it, I was busy. I had work. He stopped again, something in his throat. One afternoon in the summer, he was 7, I think. He went into the north cornfield to follow me and I didn't notice. He got turned around. He was in there for maybe 45 minutes before I found him. Rodrigo was very still. He was sitting on the ground when I found him, Dale said. Crying. Scared. He'd been trying not to cry, I could tell. He was already learning that from me, but he couldn't hold it anymore. He set the wrench down. I carried him out. He didn't say anything the whole way. I didn't say anything. He looked up at Rodrigo. I put him down at the edge of the field and I went back to work. I didn't hold him, didn't sit with him, just put him down and went back to the corn. Rodrigo was quiet for a moment. Why? Dale looked at the middle distance. Because I didn't know how to do anything else, he said. I didn't know how to be that thing he needed. So I did the thing I knew how to do, which was go back to work. The barn was very quiet. Yesterday Dale said I knew how to sit with her, so I did. Rodrigo looked at him for a long moment. There was something in his expression, not pity, nothing so diminishing as that. Something more like the recognition one man feels for the internal history of another. You are still learning, Rodrigo said. Dale looked at him sharply. It was not the kind of observation anyone spoke aloud to Dale Merritt, but Rodrigo held his gaze without flinching, not aggressive, simply honest. The honesty of a man who had also made choices he couldn't undo and had decided to live with them consciously rather than bury them in work. Dale looked away first. Go get your crew started on the west boundary, he said. We need the moisture readings on that section before 8. Yes, sir. Rodrigo turned to go. At the barn door, he stopped. Mr. Merritt, Elena is being discharged Sunday. She'll be all right. A pause. I thought you should know. Dale nodded once. He picked up the wrench. The morning passed in focused, pressured work. The overcast had flattened the heat slightly, which helped the crews, but it also carried in it the psychological weight of the approaching weather window. Everyone on the farm worked with the particular intensity of people who can feel a deadline in their bodies. Dale ran the North Ridge again and was making good time when, at 11:20, his phone buzzed. He didn't take calls during combining. He let it go. It buzzed again immediately after. He let it go. A third time. He pulled the combine to a stop and took out the phone. 3 calls from a number he recognized but had not heard from in more than 2 years. Robert Deakins, his brother-in-law. Susan's younger brother who lived in Wichita. Dale stared at the screen. He called back. Dale. Robert's voice was strange, tight in a way that wasn't like him. Robert was an easy man, a salesman's personality, all surface and forward motion. This wasn't that. I need to talk to you about something. I'm in the middle of harvest. I know. This can't wait. Dale looked at the wheat in front of him. Is it about Susan? A pause. It's about what happened before she died. What happened between you and her? The last, Robert stopped. There's some things I need to say, Dale. Some things I should have said years ago. Can you come to Wichita? Dale sat in the cab of the idling combine with the phone against his ear and the Kansas sky pressing down. Not until the harvest is done, he said. Sunday. Sunday, Robert agreed. His voice was still strange. Dale, this isn't a fight. I just need you to know something. Something she told me. The line was quiet for a moment. I'll be there Sunday, Dale said. and hung up. He sat for a long moment. The grain reel turned slowly at idle. The wheat waited. He thought about Susan. He thought, as he sometimes did in the cab of this machine, about the particular way she had of pressing her lips together when she was trying not to laugh at something. He said, a nearly invisible smile that lived in the corners of her mouth, and that he had, in his more honest moments, thought was the most beautiful expression in the world. He thought about the last week of her life, about the hospital room, about the night Caleb had asked about. He put the combine back into gear. The crisis, when it came, arrived without announcement in the way real crises often do. At 2:15, Caleb radioed from the south field. "Dad, we've got a problem." Dale's voice was flat. "What problem?" "The number 2 combine. Hydraulic failure on the header. It's down." Dale closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. "How bad?" "The hydraulic line on the left header extension blew out. Victor's looking at it now, but it's not a field repair. We'd need a part." "What part?" "CN703 header hose assembly. Maybe the fitting too. Victor thinks the fitting cracked." Dale was already reaching for his phone. The nearest John Deere dealer with parts inventory was in Pratt, 32 miles away. He called. They had the hose assembly. They did not have the fitting. He called the dealer in Hutchinson, 90 miles. They had both. He called Martinez. "Can you run to Hutchinson?" Martinez could. He would take Dale's truck, be back in 3 hours if he pushed it. 3 hours. Dale did the math. With one combine down, 3 hours, and the weather window closing Saturday evening, they would fall short of the contract threshold by approximately 80 to 90 acres, roughly 4 to 5% of the total yield. Not catastrophic, but enough to trigger the penalty clause, $4 per bushel below contract price on the shortfall. His jaw was tight, kept combining. At 4:30, Emma came back to the fields. Her ankle was better, not good, but functional enough for her to walk carefully with one hand holding her father's arm. Rodrigo had finished running the west boundary section and was now supervising the header repair. Crouched in the stubble beside Victor Huerta with a flashlight, despite the afternoon light, talking through the hydraulic system in a rapid mix of Spanish and technical English. Emma, left on the periphery, walked carefully to where Caleb was sitting on the running board of the chase cart, doing fuel calculations in a notebook. She sat beside him. She looked at his notebook. "What is that?" she asked. "Numbers," Caleb said. "What numbers?" Caleb thought about how to explain harvest economics to a 7-year-old. "It's like, you know when you're saving up for something, and you keep track of how much you have?" Emma nodded seriously. "We're doing that, but for grain. We're counting how much wheat we got and how much we need." Emma thought about this. "Do you have enough?" Caleb looked at his numbers. "We might be a little short." She was quiet for a moment. Then, with complete seriousness, "That makes your dad sad?" Caleb looked at her. "It makes him work harder," he said. "My dad, when things are hard, he works harder, instead of..." He stopped. "Instead of other things." Emma considered this. "My mom says that's what men do when they're scared," she said. "They do more." Caleb stared at her. She had gone back to looking at the fields with the serene observational patience of a child who has nothing to do, and no problem with that. "They do more, when they're scared." Caleb sat with the notebook in his lap for a long time without writing anything. Martinez came back from Hutchinson at 5:50 with the parts. The number 2 combine was repaired and running again by 6:45, a minor miracle of efficient field maintenance that Dale acknowledged with a single nod at Victor Huerta, which Victor received with the quiet satisfaction of a man who didn't need more than that. They ran until 9:30. Past dark, the combines running on their work lights, cutting through the night wheat with the particular alien beauty of industrial agriculture. At night, machines illuminated from below, grain dust hazing the light beams, the smell of cut stems and turned earth hanging in the cooling air. Dale climbed down from the John Deere at 9:42. He stood for a moment in the dark, looking at what was left. Maybe 140 acres. A long day tomorrow and they'd make the contract. He looked up. The overcast had thickened. The stars were gone. He smelled rain coming. He stood there in the dark and felt the full weight of everything bearing down at once. The harvest, the weather, Robert Deakins' call, Caleb's question in the kitchen, the memory of a small girl's arms around his neck, and how unexpectedly easy it had been to hold her. He walked to the farmhouse. In the kitchen on the table was a folded piece of paper. He opened it. It was a drawing crayon from Emma's notebook, a field of yellow wheat, a large figure with a small figure on its back. Above them, a sun with too many rays, the way children always draw suns. At the bottom, in a child's careful block letters, "Thank you, immersive farmer." Dale stood in the kitchen with the drawing in his hands. He stood there for a long time. Saturday morning arrived with the smell of rain already in it. Dale was out of bed at 4:45. The overcast from yesterday had descended overnight into a low, dark ceiling, and the southwest wind that had been steady and dry all week had shifted to come from the northwest, carrying moisture. His phone weather app now said 80% chance of rain, onset between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. The more reliable indicators, the pressure drop he felt in his knees. The way the farm dogs had been restless all night, the color of the clouds over the northwest horizon, said more like noon. He had maybe 6 hours of workable weather, possibly 7. He woke Caleb at 5. He woke Rodrigo at 5:05. By 5:30, every piece of equipment on the Merritt farm was running. The morning was a study in controlled urgency. Dale set the pace, and the pace was punishing. He ran the John Deere hard on the north quarter, pushing the forward speed as fast as the header could effectively manage, watching the yield monitor constantly, adjusting on the move. Rodrigo had his 8-man crew running the 2 remaining combines on the south sections, working in the coordinated rhythm that came from a team that had done this together many times. Caleb ran the grain cart and the truck loop to the storage bins without stopping. A 30-minute circuit he repeated over and over, his movements becoming automatic, efficient, almost meditative. They didn't talk much. The radio traffic was sparse and operational. South quarter at 60%. Number 2, combine, bin full, pulling out, winds picking up on the west side. Dale tracked all of it and said almost nothing in return. His eyes moved constantly. Field, yield monitor, sky, field. The combine's GPS guidance system kept the rows straight while his attention was everywhere else, calculating, adjusting, watching the northwest horizon with the focused wariness of a man who has been in a race against weather before and knows exactly how it ends when you lose. At 9:15, Rodrigo's voice came over the radio. East section complete. Dale did the math. With the east section done and the number 2 combine moving to help with the south, they were at approximately 68% of the total contract volume already in the bins. The remaining acreage, about 90 to 100 acres on the north and south quarters, needed to be done before the rain. It was going to be close. At 10:40, Caleb pulled the grain cart up alongside Dale's combine for a transfer and climbed up to the cab. Dale looked at him. "What?" "I need to tell you something," Caleb said. "Now?" "I called Robert Deakins this morning." Caleb met his father's eyes. He was wearing that careful expression again, the one from the kitchen, the one that meant he was pressing against the silence deliberately. "He told me why he's been calling." Dale's hands went still on the controls. "You called Robert?" "He's been trying to reach you for 2 years, Dad. 2 years of calls you didn't answer. He had something he needed to tell you. He told me." The combine idled. The grain transfer auger hummed between the machines. "Caleb, she wrote you a letter," Caleb said. "Mom, she wrote you a letter the week before she died, and she gave it to Robert to keep." She said. He stopped, collected himself. She said she didn't know if she'd be able to say what she needed to say out loud, and she wanted to make sure you got it. She gave it to Robert because she knew you two weren't close, and he would hold on to it until you were ready. Dale looked at the wheat in front of the combine. "She thought you'd come to him when you were ready," Caleb said quietly. "She thought it would take you maybe a year, maybe 2. He paused. "It's been 7. The air smelled like rain. "Why did she give it to Robert and not?" Dale started. "Because she knew, if she gave it to you directly, you'd put it somewhere and not open it," Caleb said. "She knew you. She knew exactly how you deal with things." Something in Dale's face moved. A slight shift, like a fault line settling. "Robert has it," Caleb said. "He'll give it to you Sunday." Dale looked at his son. 7 years of distance between them, and Caleb was standing here in the cab of this combine at 10:40 in the morning with weather coming and a harvest, hanging and telling him this, directly, without flinching, with Susan's eyes and Dale's jaw, and some combination of both their courage. "Go back to the cart," Dale said. His voice was rough. "Dad, I heard you, Caleb." He looked at his son. "I heard you. Go back to the cart," Caleb went. But this time the silence behind him felt different. Not a closed door, but something more like the moment before a door opens. The rain started at 12:53. Not gradually. Not with warning drops or a gentle increase. It started the way summer rain in Kansas sometimes starts. A wall of it rolling in from the northwest, turning the air gray, hitting the wheat with a sound like 10,000 hands clapping. Dale saw it coming with maybe 4 minutes of warning, enough time to make one final radio call. All combines, finish your current pass and hold, get to shelter. He was on the south quarter working the last section. He had 90 seconds before the rain wall hit. He pushed the forward speed to maximum, the header thundering, the grain tank filling, and ran the last 200 meters of the row as the rain came down on the cab like a pressure washer. The visibility dropping to 30 feet, the windshield wipers useless against it. He brought the combine to a stop at the field's edge and sat in the cab while the rain hammered the metal around him. He pulled up the yield monitor summary. Total harvested, 91.4% of contracted volume. He sat with that number for a moment. 91.4%. The contract required 90. The penalty clause triggered below 90. He had made it, by 1.4%, by approximately 60 acres worth of wheat, which was approximately the amount of ground he had abandoned on Thursday morning to go looking for a lost child. He sat in the rain-hammered cab and thought about that. Rodrigo appeared at the cab door 20 minutes later, soaked through his jacket, climbing up to knock on the glass. Dale opened the door. Rain came in immediately, cold and loud. "We're at contract," Dale said before Rodrigo could speak. Rodrigo nodded. His face was wet, his hat dark with rain. "I know, Caleb told me." He paused. "I want you to know something." "You already told me something this morning," Dale said, not unkindly. "How many things do you have?" Something in Rodrigo's expression shifted. A brief, genuine smile. "Just one more." He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper and a plastic sleeve, the kind of protective measure a careful man takes. "Elena called me this morning, from the hospital. She wanted me to give you this." Dale took it. He looked at Rodrigo. "My wife is a grateful woman," Rodrigo said. "More so than me, and I am already very grateful." He climbed back down into the rain. Dale unfolded the paper. It was a page of hospital stationery, the Wichita General letterhead at the top, written in careful English that had clearly been labored over. "Dear Mr. Merritt, my husband told me what you did for our Emma. He told me you stopped your harvest for her. He told me you carried her out of your field and sat with her under your tree and kept her safe until he could come. I am a mother who was not there for her daughter when she needed me. That is a weight I will carry. But knowing that you were there, that a man like you was there, makes it lighter. My husband says you are a hard man. I think hard men are sometimes the ones who know exactly what matters and what doesn't. You knew. Thank you for knowing." Elena Solano. Dale folded the letter along its original creases. He put it in his shirt pocket. The rain came down on the Kansas fields. That evening, the bunkhouse. Rodrigo's crew had gathered inside out of the rain. The harvest was done, the equipment secured, the grain bins sealed, and there was nothing left to do but eat and rest and wait for tomorrow. Someone had a Bluetooth speaker going, a Mexican radio station out of Wichita playing ranchera music. And someone else had produced a bottle of something that was being passed around with the casual generosity of tired men who had worked hard and knew it. Dale appeared at the bunkhouse door at 7:30. The room went slightly quiet. Not uncomfortable, just attentive. The presence of the farm's owner in the bunkhouse was not a common event. He looked at Rodrigo. "Come eat at the house," he said. "You and Emma." Rodrigo looked at him. "Mr. Merritt." "Caleb's cooking," Dale said. Which was almost certainly not true. Caleb cooked about 5 things competently, but there's food. "Come." A pause. Rodrigo looked at Emma, who was sitting on a bottom bunk with her coloring notebook, her ankle still wrapped. She was watching Dale with those serious dark eyes. "Kiara's ear? Mia?" Emma looked at Dale. "Will you be there?" she asked. Dale looked at her for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I'll be there." She nodded. Then yes. Caleb had in fact made chili. A large pot of it, with cornbread from a box, which was about the outer limit of his culinary range. He had set the kitchen table for 4 without asking, which Dale noticed and did not comment on. The 4 of them sat in the Merritt kitchen, Dale and Caleb on one side, Rodrigo and Emma on the other, and ate with the particular ease of people who are too tired to be self-conscious. The ranchera music from the bunkhouse drifted faintly through the walls. The rain tapped against the blue kitchen curtains. Emma ate with focused efficiency and then sat with her hands in her lap, looking around the kitchen with the observational patience she seemed to apply to everything. "Are those your mom's?" she asked. She was pointing at the curtains. Caleb and Dale both looked at the curtains. Caleb looked at Dale. "Yes," Dale said. "They're pretty," Emma said. "Blue is a good color for a kitchen." No one said anything for a moment. "She picked them out," Dale said. He wasn't sure why he was saying it. Drove 40 miles to a fabric store in Hutchinson to find exactly the right shade. Came home and sewed them herself. He looked at the curtains. Said the kitchen needed something that looked like sky. Rodrigo was quiet. Caleb was very still. "She sounds nice," Emma said. "She was," Dale said. The word was settled into the kitchen the way a stone settles into still water. "Mi abuela has blue curtains too," Emma said. "In Michoacan. She says blue keeps the bad spirits away." Dale looked at the curtains for a moment longer. Maybe that's why she picked blue. Caleb looked at his father's face. Something was different in it. Not soft exactly, not relaxed, but present in a way it wasn't usually present. As though some layer of distance had been removed, and what was underneath was just a man, tired and full of chili, sitting at a table with his dead wife's curtains and talking about her as though she were real. As though she had always been real and it had just been a long time since he'd said so out loud. After dinner, after Rodrigo and Emma had gone back to the bunkhouse, Emma having fallen asleep on the living room couch before they left and Rodrigo carrying her out the way, Dale had carried her out of the wheat, with that same careful tenderness. Dale and Caleb sat at the kitchen table with coffee cups and the ledger between them. Dale opened the ledger. He looked at the numbers for a while without speaking. The rain was steady outside, the Kansas night deep and dark around the farmhouse. "We made contract," Caleb said, "by 1.4%. Still made it." Dale turned a page in the ledger. Equipment repair cost us $840 on the hydraulic fitting. Martinez's mileage, another 60. The 3 hours Thursday he stopped calculating out loud. He closed the ledger. Caleb watched him. "A was worth it," Dale said. Not as though he were convincing himself. As a statement of accounting, a different kind of ledger with different columns. Caleb wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. The heat of it was good in the cooling kitchen. "Dad, about what I said. About Mom. I heard you. I know you heard me. I want to." Caleb stopped. Organized his words the way his father had taught him to organize tools. Everything in its right place. Nothing wasted. "I'm not angry. I want you to know that. I was for a long time, I think. I didn't understand why you sent me home. I thought," he looked at the table, "I thought maybe you wanted to be alone with her at the end. That I was in the way." Dale looked at his son. His jaw was tight. "You were never in the way. Then why?" The rain tapped at the windows. "Because she asked me to," Dale said. Caleb looked up. "She asked me to send you home," Dale said. "She didn't want you to see her at the end." The last days were, he stopped. His hands were flat on the table, those large, scarred hands pressing down as though the table needed anchoring. "She didn't want that to be what you remembered. She wanted you to remember her before, the way she was before." He looked at the curtains. She was particular about things like that. What people carried, what they remembered. Caleb was very still. "I honored that," Dale said. "It was the last thing she asked me for. So I honored it." The kitchen was quiet for a long time. "Were you with her?" Caleb asked. His voice was careful and young in a way it hadn't sounded in years. "Yes," Dale said. "I was with her." Caleb nodded slowly. Something in his face was moving. Not quite breaking, but releasing. The way ground releases water after a long dry season. Slowly. A little at a time. "She knew you'd come back," Dale said. "In the morning. She told me," the last coherent thing she said, maybe 2 hours before, his voice changed slightly, dropped in register, she said, "Make sure Caleb comes back in the morning so I can tell him." He stopped. "She died at 4:17. You came back at 7. Caleb pressed his lips together. "She wanted to tell you herself," Dale said. "She didn't get the chance." He looked at his son directly, gray-blue eyes, level and open in a way that cost him something visible. "So I'll tell you what she would have said, as best I know it. She would have told you that you made her proud every single day, that you were the best thing she and I ever did, that she wasn't afraid of where she was going, she was only sad to leave you." He paused. "She said that to me. I'm telling it to you. The rain. Caleb put both hands over his face. He was 29 years old in some emotional sense in that moment and 12 years old in another, and he sat at his mother's kitchen table under his mother's blue curtains and let himself cry in front of his father for the first time since the funeral. Dale sat across from him. He didn't look away. He didn't find a task to perform or a tool to organize or a field to walk. After a moment, he reached across the table and put one large hand over Caleb's wrist. He left it there. Sunday arrived clean. The rain had moved through overnight, leaving behind the particular washed clarity that follows a Kansas summer storm. The air scrubbed and cooled. The fields gleaming in low morning light. The soil dark with moisture. The wheat stubble silver gold and dripping. The bins were sealed. The harvest was done. The contract was met. Dale sat on the porch at 6 in the morning, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he did not get up to go anywhere when he finished his coffee. He sat in the wooden chair that had been on that porch since before he'd bought the farm, the same chair his predecessor had sat in. A man named Harold Fitch, who'd farmed this land for 30 years before the bank took it in 1987, and Dale had bought it at auction for 11 cents on the dollar, and spent the next 3 decades making it into something Harold Fitch would have been angry about and then proud of. Dale sat in Harold Fitch's chair and looked at his fields and felt something he hadn't felt in longer than he could accurately measure. It wasn't happiness exactly. It wasn't peace. It was something more functional than both of those, a sense of arrival, of being where he was supposed to be, in the specific present moment, without the constant forward pull of the next task. He thought about Elena's letter in his shirt pocket. He thought about Susan's letter sitting in Robert Deakins' house in Wichita, waiting 7 years for him to be ready to receive it. He thought about Caleb's hand covering his face at the kitchen table, and his own hand on his son's wrist, and how that small contact had felt enormous, not because it was grand, but because it was real, and because real things he was beginning to understand were the only things that mattered in the end. He thought about Emma and the wheat, the weight of her in his arms, the way she'd said grand with her hands pressed against the combine's cab window, and the way that single word, simple, enormous, full of wonder, had cracked something open in him that he hadn't known was sealed. Rodrigo came to find him at 7:30. The crew was loading equipment into the trucks, the harvest done, the season over for the Merritt farm, the crew moving on to their next contract in Nebraska in 2 days. Emma was helping in her 7-year-old way by carrying small items and handing them up to the men and taking this responsibility with great seriousness. Rodrigo sat on the porch steps. Dale looked at him. "How's the ankle?" Dale asked. "Good. She was running this morning." A pause. "I tried to stop her. Did it work?" "No." Rodrigo smiled briefly. "She is stubborn. She gets it from her mother." They sat for a moment with that, 2 men watching a farm come back to its quiet self after the organized chaos of Harvest Week. "We'll be back next year," Rodrigo said. "If you want us..." Dale looked at him. "I want you." Rodrigo nodded. Another pause. "She talks about you," he said. "Emma. Since Thursday she talks about the farmer." He glanced at Dale. "She says you're like a mountain." Dale was quiet for a moment. "Your daughter is something." "Yes," Rodrigo said with a simplicity that held every dimension of what a father feels when someone acknowledges what he already knows about his child. "She is..." At 9 o'clock, Dale knocked on Caleb's door. This was not something he did. Caleb's door had always been a boundary, Dale respected with the thoroughness he applied to property lines. Exact. Permanent. Not crossed without explicit invitation. The knock, quiet but firm, was a small revolution. "Yeah," Caleb said from inside. Dale opened the door. Caleb was sitting on the edge of his bed in yesterday's clothes, phone in hand, hair not yet managed. He looked up with the slightly guarded expression. That was his default with his father. The expression that said, "How much space should I leave? Which direction is this going?" "I'm driving to Wichita today," Dale said, "to see Robert." Caleb looked at him. "To get the letter?" "Yes." A pause. "You want me to come?" Dale considered this, not hesitating exactly, but taking the question seriously the way it deserved. "I don't know what's in the letter," he said. "It might be. I don't know what it is." "I know. It might be hard, Dad." Caleb stood up. It was almost exactly Dale's height now, a fact that still caught Dale slightly off guard sometimes. Susan's eyes, his jaw, her heart somewhere underneath all of it. She was my mother. Whatever's in that letter, he stopped. I want to be there. Dale looked at his son for a long moment. Get cleaned up, he said. We leave at 10. The drive to Wichita took 2 hours on a Sunday morning with light traffic. Route 54 west through the flat land, the after-rain sky enormous and blue above the prairie. Dale drove. Caleb sat in the passenger seat. They didn't talk much for the first hour, but it was a different silence than the one they had lived inside for 7 years. Not a wall, but a companion. Something that walked alongside them without demanding anything. At the hour mark, Caleb asked, "What do you think she wanted to say?" Dale kept his eyes on the highway. Things she ran out of time to say in person. Good things or hard things? Dale thought about Susan. About the particular complexity of a marriage, the love that was simple and the history that wasn't, about the things you mean to say and the things you hold back in the moment when holding back is no longer possible, but the time has already run out. Both, he said. Caleb nodded. He looked out the passenger window at the Kansas prairie rolling past, the flat immensity of it, the sky that went all the way to the end of the world in every direction. She used to say Kansas was the most honest state, Caleb said, because you couldn't hide anything. There's nowhere to hide out here. Dale glanced at him. She was right, Dale said. Robert Deakins lived in a modest ranch house in East Wichita, the kind of neighborhood that had been built in the 1970s and maintained well without ever being updated. Brick facades, mature elms, sprinkler systems, 2-car garages. He met them in the driveway before they'd reached the front door, which meant he had been watching for them, which meant the waiting had been hard for him too. Robert was 51, shorter than Dale by several inches, with Susan's dark eyes and a different kind of face. They had both been careful with each other since Susan died, orbiting around the loss without landing on it. Christmas cards and occasional calls and the sustained, mutual courtesy of two men who shared someone important and didn't know how to talk about her. He shook Dale's hand, and he shook Caleb's hand and held on for an extra moment, the way men do when they mean something more than a handshake. Come inside, he said. They sat in Robert's living room, the room of a bachelor who had once had better furniture, the couch slightly worn, the bookshelves full and organized. A framed photo of Susan on the mantel from what looked like her early 30s, laughing at something just outside the frame. Caleb looked at the photo for a long moment. Robert brought coffee and sat across from them. He looked at Dale. I should have reached out harder, Robert said. I knew you weren't going to come on your own and I should have driven out there and made you deal with it. He shook his head slightly. She knew you better than I did. She said, give him time, he'll come when he's ready. He stopped. I should have trusted her on that. You did, Dale said. You held it. That was the job she gave you. Robert looked at him. Then he reached into the side table drawer and took out an envelope. It was a standard white envelope, the kind you'd find in any office supply store. And on the front in Susan's handwriting, the handwriting Dale still sometimes saw in his own kitchen. When he looked at the grocery list she had taped to the refrigerator, and that he had never quite managed to throw away, it said, for Dale, when he's ready. Robert held it out. Dale took it. His hands were steady. They were always steady, the hands of a man who had controlled them through decades of machinery and cold and grief. But Caleb, sitting beside him, could see the slight change in the muscles of his father's jaw. Could see the way Dale turned the envelope over once and then set it on his knee and looked at it. She wrote Caleb separately, Robert said. He produced a second envelope, smaller, for Caleb, for when he's older. She wrote this one when he was 12. He stopped. I think she expected you to pick them up sooner. Caleb took his envelope. He held it with both hands. Do you need me to give you some space? Robert asked. Yes, Dale said. Robert went into the kitchen. They heard him filling the coffee pot, the particular noise of a man manufacturing reasons to be elsewhere. Dale and Caleb sat in the living room with their mother's envelopes. Together? Caleb said. Dale looked at his son. Together, he said. They opened them at the same time. Dale's letter was 2 pages in Susan's precise, slightly slanted hand, the handwriting of a woman who had learned it from a teacher who believed penmanship was character, and who had taken that seriously. He read it slowly. His eyes moved down the page with the deliberateness of a man reading something he intends to remember exactly. He did not read it aloud. He read it privately, the way she had written it for him, the specific him. The man she had known for 26 years and loved with the particular exhausted, devoted love that long marriages produce. The kind that has survived seasons of distance and misunderstanding and the accumulated weight of all the things to people never quite find the right moment to say. He read the parts about their early years, the first farm they'd rented, the winter the furnace failed, the way he used to come in from the fields in the evening and find her at the kitchen table, with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and how she had said once that was her favorite moment of every day, him coming through the door. He hadn't known that. She had never told him that, and he had never asked, and now he knew it from a piece of paper written by a woman who had understood. By the end, that the time for assuming the other person already knew was dangerously finite. He read the parts about Caleb, about the things she had seen in their son that she trusted Dale to help grow, the gentleness under the stubbornness, the capacity for love that she knew was in him even when he couldn't show it, the way she believed that Caleb and Dale would eventually find their way to each other if they were given enough time and enough honesty. He read the part about her final weeks, about the things she had understood, lying in that hospital bed with the particular clarity that comes at the end of things, about what her life had meant and what she was most grateful for. About Dale, she had written, "I know you think you weren't enough. You were exactly enough. I need you to believe that. Not for me. I already know it. For you. You need to put that weight down, Dale. It's been on you long enough." He sat with that sentence for a long time. He had carried it for 7 years, the belief, never fully examined but always present, that he had failed her somehow. That the man he was practical, silent, unable to find the language for the enormous things, had not been the man she deserved. That somewhere in the gap between what he felt and what he was able to show, she had spent her years wanting something more than he could give. She was telling him from a page written in a hospital room 7 years ago that the gap had been smaller than he thought, that she had seen inside it and found something she recognized and loved. He folded the letter along its original creases. He put it back in the envelope. He held the envelope in his hands for a moment. Then he looked at Caleb. Caleb had finished his letter. He was sitting with it in his lap, his mother's handwriting facing up, and his face was wet in the uncomplicated way of someone who has received something they didn't know they needed, but had been missing for a very long time. He looked at his father. "She said you loved us," Caleb said. "More than you could ever say. She said she knew that, and she wanted me to know it too." He stopped. His jaw worked. "She said not to be too hard on you. That you showed love the way some men do, by never stopping, by being there, by making sure the ground was solid under everyone's feet." He looked at Dale. She said, "The farm is still there because your father is the man he is. That's not nothing, that's everything." Dale said nothing. "I think," Caleb stopped. He looked at his envelope, then at the photo on the mantel. "I think she was right. I think I'd been angry at you for the wrong thing. You weren't absent. You were." He searched. "You were present in the only way you knew how to be present. And I was waiting for a different kind of presence and calling the kind you had nothing." Dale's hands were on his knees. He was looking at the floor. "That was wrong," Caleb said. "I'm sorry." Dale looked up. "Don't apologize to me," he said. "I'm the one who—" He stopped. His voice was rough. "I should have been more. I should have found the way to show you more directly. I knew it wasn't enough. I knew even then—" He met Caleb's eyes. "I'm sorry. For every time you needed me to say something and I couldn't find the words, for the distance, for making you carry the quiet all those years." It was the most he had said in a single breath and longer than either of them could remember. Caleb pressed his lips together. He nodded. "Okay," he said. Not dismissively. In the way of a door that has finally opened, acknowledgement, receipt, the beginning of something that would take time to fully arrive but had at least started. Dale leaned forward and put his elbows on his knees. He looked at his son. Then, with a deliberateness that made it clearly intentional rather than reflexive, he reached over and put a hand on the back of Caleb's neck, a brief, firm grip, the way you hold something you're glad is still there. Caleb closed his eyes. Robert came back from the kitchen. He looked at the two of them and understood enough from what he saw to set the coffee down quietly and say nothing. Susan's photo looked down from the mantel. She was laughing at something just outside the frame. They left Wichita at 2 in the afternoon. The drive back was quieter than the drive out, but it was a good quiet. The quiet of two people who have said what they needed to say and don't need to fill the space where it used to be missing. The Kansas highway unrolled ahead of them, the after-rain sky enormous and honest above the prairie. Exactly the way Caleb had described it. Nowhere to hide, everything visible, the land laid out in every direction like an open hand. Dale drove. Caleb rested his elbow on the window frame and watched the fields go by. "What are you going to do with it?" Caleb asked. He meant the letter. "Read it again," Dale said. "Keep it." A pause. "She kept everything. She kept the menus from the first 2 restaurants we ever went to. She kept your first lost tooth in a little box in her nightstand." He glanced at Caleb. "Did you know that?" "No. I found it when I was going through her things. I left it there." He paused. "Still there." Caleb looked at his father for a moment, then out the window. "You didn't change anything in the house?" "No. I thought it was because you couldn't let go." Dale was quiet for a moment. "Maybe some of it was that," he said honestly, "but some of it," he paused. "She built that house, the curtains, the way the kitchen smelled, the pictures on the walls. She built it on purpose, piece by piece, and it was good. It was right." He looked at the road. Didn't see the point in undoing what was good. Caleb turned this over. "That's almost romantic," he said. Dale looked at him sharply. Caleb raised his hands, almost smiling. Almost. Something crossed Dale's face, brief, involuntary. The thing that Susan had described to Robert once as the smile he doesn't mean to let out. It was there for a second and then gone, but it had been there, real and unmistakable. Caleb saw it. He stored it away like something precious, the way you keep what you know you might not find again for a while. They got back to the farm at 4 in the afternoon. The place was quiet in the after-harvest way, the bins full, the equipment clean and put away, the fields stubbled and wide. The bunkhouse was empty now. Rodrigo's crew had finished loading and left mid-morning for the drive north toward Nebraska, but on the porch railing weighed down with a smooth stone was a folded note. Dale picked it up. It was in Rodrigo's handwriting, clean and careful, the Spanish of a man who took written communication seriously. "Mr. Merritt, thank you for this year. The work was good. The farm's good. But mostly thank you for Thursday. Emma asks if she can come back next year. I told her that was your decision. She said to tell you she will bring more crayons. See you in August." Arcelano postscripted, in a child's uneven block letters, "I will bring the best crayons." Dale held the note for a moment. Then he set it on the porch railing beside his coffee mug. He looked out at the fields. The wheat was gone, harvested, binned, on its way to becoming bread and flour and all the invisible things that fed people who would never know this farm existed. The ground was dark and resting. In a few months he would begin again, the cover crop first, then the soil work, then the planting. The cycle that never fully stopped, only paused. He had always found comfort in that cycle, the relentlessness of it, the way it asked you to keep moving. But standing on the porch in the late Sunday afternoon light, with Susan's letter in his shirt pocket and Robert's handshake still in his palm and the memory of Caleb's face in a Wichita living room, he understood something he hadn't let himself understand before, that the cycle wasn't only about the land, that the same principle, plant, tend, harvest, rest, plant again, applied to everything worth keeping. He had let too many seasons pass without planting anything in the ground between himself and his son. The soil there had gone hard and dry, but soil that had gone hard could be turned. That was the work. That was always the work. Caleb was in the kitchen when Dale came inside. He had the stovetop on and was doing something with eggs and whatever was left in the refrigerator. The focused, slightly improvised cooking of a young man who has decided that feeding people is the most practical form of love available to him in this moment. Dale sat at the kitchen table. Caleb cooked. The kitchen smelled of butter and heat, and the particular Sunday evening smell of a farm at the end of a long week. The blue curtains moved slightly in the breeze from the window Caleb had cracked open to let the after-rain air in. "You want coffee, or are you done for the day?" Caleb asked without turning around. "Done," Dale said. Caleb glanced back over his shoulder. In 7 years, he had never heard his father say he was done for the day, as though he meant it. "Okay," Caleb said, and turned back to the eggs. They ate at the kitchen table, the two of them, in the quiet of the farm settling into evening. The fields lay dark and wide outside the windows. The bins were full, the contract was met, the letter was in his pocket. His son was across the table. Dale looked at the blue curtains. She said the kitchen needed something that looked like sky. He reached into his shirt pocket and took out Susan's letter. He set it on the table between them, not opening it, not explaining it. Just setting it there, present in the room where she had sewn those curtains and made those grocery lists and wrapped her hands around a mug of tea every evening and waited for the door to open. Caleb looked at the envelope, then at his father. Dale looked back at him. She was right, Dale said. About you. About everything she said. Caleb nodded slowly. She usually was. Yeah. Dale looked at the envelope for a moment. She usually was. Outside, the Kansas evening deepened into dark. The kind of dark that only exists where there is no city light to compete with it. A true, total dark broken only by the stars that had come back after the rain, scattered and enormous across the flat sky. The farm was quiet. The ground was resting. And in the kitchen under the blue curtains, two men were finding their way back to each other across 7 years of silence, with nothing but the ordinary materials of an ordinary evening. Eggs, coffee, a kitchen table, and the specific, irreplaceable light of someone who was gone but had known somehow that this moment would come. She had simply been patient enough to wait for it.